My grandfather, who was playing semi-professional soccer and 19 years old, came home and his first wife and son were murdered in the Holocaust.
Thank you for being on Winning Wednesday. Really appreciate you being here. And I wanted to give you a chance just to kind of tell the audience a little bit about yourself and maybe something they don't already know.
For me, I've always been about seeking and uncovering humanity in sports around the globe. When I look back on my life as a kid or now almost 40, that's really been home, kind of home base for me. That has always been a driving force of the story behind, whether it was playing or coaching or broadcasting or sharing stories. That has been it. What people probably don't know about me is that while I have this weird name, Yogi, I probably didn't align with it purposely as a kid. And I'm so thankful that I got it. And it probably hit me in my early 20s of like, yeah, to be a yogi is to be one that is connected to the present moment. Wished I was John or Pat for a while.
Yeah.
But as I got older, I realized there was a uniqueness because you were going to remember my name if I met you.
Right.
So then I wanted to make sure that there was something that you would remember in addition to that.
Nowadays, it's so easy to get forgotten. So if you can't own your name and own your story, then you'll just be another face that people don't recognize.
Every child in our family got an Indian name and a Hebrew name. Yogi, of course, is Indian, and the true definition is a union. And I had spent a little over a month in India a few years ago with our dad, and it's got that connection to it, right? From up and down that radiant country, whether you're in the cities and amid chaos like you've never seen before in Delhi or Mumbai, or if you're in Kathmandu, up in Nepal and working your way up there through Rishikesh and Dharamshala and true places of peace, you feel that. So yeah, I think, look, the one thing that the pandemic's done is that it's given us an opportunity to unite.
It is really nice just in general during this pandemic to have gotten to know people around the world that I feel like we wouldn't have gotten to know otherwise if it wasn't for this virtual environment.
I think that's something that's really fun. If you look at the stages of grief, there's traditionally 5 stages, and the final one being acceptance. And we've all gone through our form of grief, whether it was we can't go to the restaurant that we want to go to and that bugs us, or we've lost somebody, right? The true extreme. Some argue there's a 6th stage called meaning, right? So we've been able to find meaning or recognize that this something doesn't mean as much as we thought we did, right? Maybe going to that restaurant didn't mean that much. Or if we always said, hey, I would love to write a book, give me a couple months to do it. You've had months to do it. If you haven't done it, maybe you've realized that that book didn't mean as much to you. It didn't carry as much weight as you thought. I think this whole time in this pandemic has been about finding meaning. For someone who's traveled all over the globe and then all over the United States in college football season, I was grounded for the first time in my life. And I found great meaning in being around a newborn, being around a 6-year-old, being around my wife. And traveling took a different meaning for me. Now, as I've begun to come out of this pandemic and go to schools and go to college campuses, I'm having more fun than I ever did. I'm making sure on every trip I'm seeing something versus just going, calling the game, hyper-focused, hyper-professional. I'm like, I'm gonna go to that restaurant I've heard a lot about, but I'd never gone in Portland or Eugene or San Francisco or Salt Lake City or Phoenix or wherever it may be. So I think it's all given us, I hope, a sense of finding meaning in our lives.
To your point, like how many times did we just go through life and not stop and be casual? We were always trying to keep this front going. And then when we go home, we're too exhausted to be ourselves anyway. And we start the mask and the ritual all over again the next day. Can you kind of walk us through what got you into storytelling? And is it the same as acting, or is it really more authentic?
A good story makes you feel something, right? A good scene makes you feel something. A good actor in a monologue makes you feel something. It could be Alabama football team. It could be a simple story about a young boy in India who's competing to be the best version of himself. Like, I really believe it's that easy. I was a writer. To my right in my office, I have every journal I've ever written in. Starting when I was in college with Pat Hoderney and wrote my first one. And I've been a writer since I was 5. I remember I came home from school in 2nd grade and my mom said, Yogi, you're a writer. I said, no, Mom. I said, I'm an NBA player. She goes, I think you're a writer.
You can do both. Right?
Yeah. And it took me a long time to accept that, but I believe in that now. I think writing is at the core. So I've always done that. And for me, it was a way to express how I felt. I think it's a way to express dreams. Think about it now, like you're feeling a lot of critics through your mobile device. And I didn't have a mobile device, thank God, but I felt critics. You're not gonna play in the NBA. You can't go play major college football. You can't achieve that dream. And it rocked me. So I stopped talking about it and I started writing it. And that's really who I became. And that's where story began for me. And then it just became different mediums, different relationships. I fell in love with different elements of it, whether it's broadcasting in front of a couple million in a live setting, or a short film or a feature length doc, like the one over my left shoulder.
Is that the one behind you? Is that with your dad, with the Santiago?
Yeah, it's called Life in a Walk. And I can remember I was trying to figure out what my next adventure would be. And at the time, my dad, he had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, had beaten it, but I still was like, wow, when he had it, I didn't ask him a bunch of questions, and I still have a bunch of questions. So I need to get some answers. So I flew home a couple days later from California to the East Coast, and I said, hey, Dad, let's go for a walk. He thought we'd go around the block, and I gave him a plane ticket, and I said, meet me in Madrid, we go in 2 weeks. And as a filmmaker, I said, let me just capture it. So we hired a crew, partnered with a production company, and when we came home, the production company, God bless them, they were like, it's cool, but we don't think there's enough for a movie. And I said, all right, can I have the footage? And they said, sure. And 8 months later, I sent them a movie poster and said, hey, come to the premiere. And it's a simple story about parents and kids and how we can get caught up in our own lives and our own journeys. And often we can miss things, right? I was that way. And especially as a male alpha athlete, there's many routes to those that are seeking their own Camino. You don't have to go for 5 weeks. We went for 3. We went up through Portugal into Spain. So you can go for 5 days and go for 5 weeks, whatever you want. But it is a amazing journey. My kids don't have a choice. They're coming with me. When they turn 14, I'm gonna take both of the boys on their own. And we're gonna go walk it.
So what else has really influenced you to becoming the person you are today, and where you find value in life today?
I have this thing on my wrist. It says Tikkun Olam, which is Hebrew for heal the world. And we've all had our form of loss in the pandemic. We did as well. I lost my mom. And my mom was a refugee from Israel, Germany, Poland. Like, she found her way here. Her parents were both Holocaust survivors. So I grew up with this ace in my back pocket, knowing like we survive, like we persevere. And as she was passing away, I was able to, because our football season was postponed out on the West Coast, I was able to go home a lot. So I spent a bunch of time with her, and she said, hey, your only job is to heal the world and put those stories out into the universe, into the world. So to answer your question, like, what am I hoping to do? I'm hoping to do that. And I don't have the answers, but I do know that an inspirational story around sport, performance, life, family, it's gonna do something. But the lens is one that there will be an impactful note on that. And if you look at the most recent series I did on the CW network called All American Stories, the only goal from the CW was make short films that get people off the couch. We did exactly that. And that healed the world, in whether it was just healing that individual character so they could see their story for the first time as a premium film, or other people that watched it that had gone through their own traumas in their own life. So that's what I hope. If you look at any story I am a part of, you say, I got lost in it, Yogi, because I started to think about my own life.
I think that's so powerful that you're basically describing, like, taking these kind of horrific, really courageous events where you might develop a chip on your shoulder and really shifting that focus into something more joy-filled that you can pay it forward and show the similarities between all of our lives and all of our stories, so that people can empathize with one another, see the humanity, and then, like you said, get off the couch. I mean, there's nothing better nowadays than getting off the couch. I'm even standing right now because I sit way too much.
I love it.
And I noticed that you've also spoken on a TEDx stage as well. Was that in relation to these stories, or was it about producing? And I would just love to hear how that was for you.
Yeah, it was a blast. I think it was 2014 when I did it.
Awesome.
And what was really cool is that I did it in Austin, and it was the Austin Women's TEDx event. And it was put on by two amazing people, Sarah Hirsch-Bordeaux, who's a filmmaker, and Alexis Jones, who is an international speaker on so many different topics. I think when you see that logo, you can easily get intimidated. And it's an intimidating process. Like, they kind of put you through the ringer. They want to hear your speech. They want the notes. And I was all over the place. Like, what am I going to talk about? And I said, I'm going to tell the story that I think impacted my life the most. And the stories about my mom's parents. And I connected it to the language of the world, which I think is ball. Like, I really think we all speak ball. And here it was my grandfather, who was playing semi-professional soccer, and 19 years old, came home, and his first wife and son were murdered in the Holocaust. then he got taken into a concentration camp and would go take a shower and didn't know if it was gonna be water or gas, and then got let out to dig his own grave and escaped and got shot 8 times in his upper left shoulder, and then got healed by a gypsy who at the time was seen as someone you didn't really connect with, and then joined the partisan movement and would hide out during the day and save people at night. What was unique is that when the Holocaust ended, he met his wife, my grandmother, on a train. Her story was at 12 years old, she was walking home from school and was told, "You can't go home." She said, "Why?" She said, it's her teacher who pulled up beside her said, "Your family was just murdered. They were axed to death." So at 12, she went on the run, hid out in farmhouse to farmhouse, frostbite, dealing with all the things that you'd imagine one of the most horrific times in the history of this planet occurred. And these two met when the Holocaust ended, and what did they do? They shared their story, right? And bonded over their story, right? So like the stories are always tethered to one another, in my opinion. So to answer your question about the actual speech, I was nervous, I was excited, I was young. I can't believe I did it then, but it was fun.
You mentioned also telling stories and bringing people together based on their trauma even, and your grandparents coming together and kind of bonding over their trauma is something that I hear so many people today talk about. Can you shed any light on how that's been for your generations within your family?
The point of life, and I learned this from my dad when we walked 236 miles in Portugal and Spain, is that his quote that I still use with my family is that man or woman are made to move, and we move through things. And I think that's really important to know, is to feel the beat along the way and keep moving. It's kind of like if you and I went back to our hometowns, and I'm gonna project here, but hung out with like our high school partner, right? Your boyfriend or girlfriend, whoever it is, if I did that with mine, like we could have a good time for 30 minutes. And then where are we going? We got nothing moving forward, right? So to me, you're always moving forward. And that to me is, that's something you have to do really purposely. You know, I made sure this year, and I have no problem talking about it. Like I went to make sure I was talking to somebody, because I was like, man, like it's been a year. We moved, bought a house, had a baby, lose your job, you know, football season, you lose your mom, like it's flying. And I think a lot of times we can just be like, oh, I'm good, I'm resilient, I'm fine. And then you take a minute and breathe, and somebody asks you the simple question like, hey, how you doing? And you're like, I'm actually not doing good, you know, whatever it is. So I think as you have your trauma, as small or as large as they may be perceived, like move through them. And maybe you bond over it, just like you bond over a sports team or like you bond over music. That's probably not going to be the foundation of anything dramatically successful, right? Like the Holocaust wasn't the foundation of their marriage for over 50 years. It was a jumping off point, and it was a connection point, and their neurons united. And then the traits from those experiences, what built their family based on resiliency, humility, empathy, and all the things. That's why my mom told me this phrase, right? She didn't tell me, don't like anybody who's German. She didn't tell me like, don't go see a Holocaust memorial because it's going to be too painful. She said, no, it's part of you. It's who you are. And I tell our kids the same thing.
I really commend you for opening up about speaking to someone throughout this past year and at any point in your life, really. But your energy alone, I mean, you have a big goofy smile. You're probably like looking happy all the time. I don't think anyone would suspect that all of this is going on in the background. Do you volunteer that, or what's your prerogative with who you share things like that with?
I live as a public figure to a large degree. So I'm not trying to divulge everything that goes on in my house unless I feel, again, like it's gonna maybe heal the world a little bit. I did an interview on a big radio station and I talked about therapy for the first time, and the feedback was really positive because people want to feel that a little bit. I felt like by sharing a little bit of me, maybe it'll allow somebody else to share a little bit of them. I'm doing it too, just like I made a movie about fathers and sons and admitted like I wasn't good enough. I didn't ask enough questions. Cool, let's talk about that. My film does that. It has reunited so many fathers and sons because dads didn't want to talk to their sons about their emotions and sons were too afraid to ask. So it forced them, worst case scenario at the end of the film, to say, hey dad, where are you from? How'd you meet mom? And like, what do you love in your life? And that's why I share it. I want to share it because I got to have the courage to do it, because I know what it's like to maybe not have that. I've had that before. You know, I go back to the first journal I wrote. I said something. I told a coach about my dream. He shitted on it. He said, Yogi, that ain't gonna happen. And then I went and wrote for the rest of my life. And then I found my voice again as I got older.
All of your examples show how much good can come from just being vulnerable and open. My understanding is the right people will receive you. And if they're not the right people, or if they don't receive you, then they're not the right people and you just kind of like let it go. But what are some ways that you would maybe say to protect yourself in those instances? Because I know you describe yourself just now as an open book. And I think that's hard for a lot of people. So how do you find that balance?
Well, I think you referenced emotional intelligence, and we spent a summer teaching quarterbacks that, and it's loosely defined, as you know, as having the ability to comprehend and understand other people's emotions. Like you have that gauge internally of why do I want to share this? Do I just need to purge it and get it out of me, which we all have those moments too? Or do I need to process this more? Having the capacity to deal with your thoughts, the thoughts of others, and do it with empathy, which is EQ.
What was the motivation for sharing emotional intelligence best practices with football players? How can they really use that on the field?
It's cool because it's a high school camp. It's called the Elite 11. And for 20 some years, this has been going on. It's the who's who of quarterbacks. And we decided, and let's make the kids vote. This is the most uncomfortable thing they'll ever do because they have to look each other in the eye like this and say, this is why I didn't vote for you. This is why I did. This is what I want to see. And then hear it back on themselves. So we began the week, we were at the Cowboy Stadium in Frisco, Texas, and it shocked them because they were like, we have to impress the coaches probably. They got to kiss our butts a little bit. And you feel that every year. And we're like, no. So we felt it was critical because I think a lot of athletes, and I use this phrase a lot, their wonder switch is turned off. Their sense of wonderment is turned off, and their imagination, which is always going, begins to worry. And I believe worry is the biggest misuse of your imagination. So can we switch the wonderment back on? Can we have you deal with challenging thoughts, swallow them and be like, oh, I'm still alive. I can still play. I can still walk. I didn't crumble to the ground. That to me was one of the coolest things that we learned from going through that process. And I hope the athletes took out of it that they no longer had to be prisoners of the moments, but products of the process. And I think that is a challenge for this generation right now.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I've been asked, what is like the goal in life? What is the secret in life? What should we try to strive for in life? And I really believe this, that the only goal in life is to give everything away. So go gain experiences, go gain those trips to Thailand as you referenced, go gain the experience in the new job that might be uncomfortable, get out of the comfort zone and gain an experience, go on a blind date, do something that is a little random. Mm-hmm. So then, once you gain that and maybe gain mastery around it, you can give the gift away. I
think that's great. So I normally close these out by asking, how do you like to win Wednesday?
Regarding the middle of the week, I really believe this, that without any clouds, there's no silver lining. Mm-hmm. And we have to decide what we see in the sky, right? It could be like, I'm looking out in LA right now and it is beautiful. There's not a cloud in the sky, but maybe there is one over to my right. I have the opportunity to focus all on that. And then maybe it'll rain, maybe it won't. Or I could say, man, it's just like a little cloud that's over there. Like, I'm cool. I think if we sit back and just let life happen, that laissez-faire approach to me is BS. I think that we can come to an understanding we can't control outcomes, but we can control decisions. I think that's like middle of the week check-in, like, am I controlling the decisions? And am I letting go of those outcomes? And within those, am I competing to make sure that I'm seeing the blue sky?